He raised the iron hammer and smashed Destiny to pieces, then looped a steel wire around him and hung him up like a pig. The moment the broken leg hit the ground, agonized screams echoed throughout the room. The man wished he were dead, but he calmly closed the door, then sat comfortably on the sofa, unable to stop the corners of his mouth from curling up. Ever since his daughter was raped and murdered, this was the first time he had smiled. That day, before going to school, his daughter had given him a big hug. Who would have thought that by the afternoon, when he saw her again, she would be a cold corpse, the precious little girl he had cherished in his hands. But now, she had been ravaged so horribly it was unbearable to look at. Her underwear was scattered, and mottled bloodstains were on her thighs. With trembling hands, he tried to straighten his daughter's clothes, his heart aching so much he could barely breathe. Fortunately, thanks to DNA testing, police quickly identified the killer. But no one expected that after being caught, the man not only showed no remorse, but even wore a smug grin, because he knew very well that in his country, there was no death penalty. Before the trial, the chief of police called to remind Brother Ding that the harshest punishment would be no more than 20 years in prison. Why should his daughter be tortured to death, and the killer only get that? Yet the murderer could still go on living as if nothing had happened. Just thinking about that man's arrogant face made his wife break down in tears. Andy might have seemed calm on the surface, but under the pretense of going to work, he secretly went out to a remote suburb and found an abandoned old house. Since the law couldn't give him the justice he wanted, he decided to take matters into his own hands. The next day, after one last reluctant look at his wife, he set out resolutely. Andy first drugged the armored car driver, then followed behind in his own car. When the drug took effect and the vehicle pulled over to the side of the road, he flashed his doctor's credentials and successfully gained the trust of the other police officer. Just as the officer thought Andy was there to help, Andy made an excuse to fetch a first aid kit from his car, but instead, he floored the gas and easily drove off with the armored vehicle. On the way, he knocked out the murderer and switched cars, going through several twists and turns. He finally brought him to the execution ground he had specially prepared. But just as Andy settled in, the police showed up at his house. However, when questioned, his wife looked genuinely shocked. On the first day he was captured, he was still stubborn and refused to admit his crimes. Andy didn't waste words. He simply smashed the man's kneecap, listening to scream repeatedly as he danced. Andy felt that compared to a painless prison sentence, this was real punishment. The next day, Andy woke up by urinating on him, but even after yesterday's friendly exchange, the guy still insisted he'd never seen the girl, so Andy stomped down on that shattered kneecap. The searing pain almost made him pass out. After punishment, Andy thoughtfully brought him food, because only by staying alive can one truly experience wishing for death. That night, Andy's wife called, urging him home. Andy said in 5 days it would be their daughter's birthday, and he would offer as a sacrifice to their daughter. Then he would stop. But when the police chief monitoring the call heard this, he could no longer stay calm. To persuade Andy, the chief shared his story. His wife had been shot and killed by a thief, and even though he wanted to take justice into his own hands, but he still followed procedure and sent the man to prison. The chief's silence was the best answer. The law can punish the criminal, but it can't heal the wounds. On the third day, he hung up with an iron chain, then took out a shotgun and viciously aimed it at his head. At that moment, his eyes were full of rage. He wanted nothing more than to pull the trigger and blow S brains out. But after struggling for a while, he still held himself back. Compared to the torment his daughter suffered, killing him like this would be letting him off too easy. Seeing that Andy was torturing him in all sorts of ways, finally started to feel real fear and even tried to confess in hopes of avoiding more pain. But his thinking was far too naive. Fueled by rage, Andy swung the iron chain hard, breaking his ribs with a brutal blow, making it hard for him to even breathe, and he began to beg for mercy uncontrollably. When his daughter begged for mercy, he had once stopped his assault, recalling the despair his daughter experienced that day. Even if he beat the man until his flesh was torn and bloodied, it still couldn't ease the hatred in his heart. It wasn't until he was completely exhausted that Andy finally stopped what he was doing. Afterward, he put the man on a nutrient drip and even used a stethoscope to check his body. All of this was just so the torment could continue. He was seeking justice for his daughter, but his wife told the media that he had gone mad. Furious, Andy called her to confront her about it. Everything he did was clearly out of love, but she insisted it was all because of guilt, implying that the accident was Andy's fault. After the argument, Andy showed no more mercy and directly put on the operating table. The other person, having witnessed his methods before, was so terrified that they burst into tears on the spot. Sure enough, Andy had prepared a special vial of medicine for him. This stuff could numb a person's motor nerves without causing them to lose consciousness. That meant would be able to feel all the pain clearly, but would be completely unable to move on the bed. As the drug was injected into his body, the face that had just been crying, in an instant he went limp. Before starting, Andy took out a photo of his daughter and showed it to. Then, Under his daughter's watchful gaze, he used a scalpel to cut open her skin and removed one of S's kidneys. He then turned it into a delicious kidney dish. The soup was served right in front of the starving, and listening to her agonized wails, Andy couldn't have been happier. Over the next few days, was tortured to the brink of madness, cursing with all her might. It seemed like she was trying to provoke Andy, hoping he'd just put her out of her misery. The filthy words coming from her mouth pushed him to the brink of collapse. Andy could have just killed her, but when he thought of his daughter's birthday, he held himself back. The whole town knew about the abduction of the murderer. The receptionist immediately recognized Andy, but instead of raising the alarm, she gave him a slight smile, as if to show her support for his act of revenge. The parents of other victims were interviewed, and some people publicly supported Andy. Some agreed that repaying someone in their own coin is the only true form of justice. But there were also parents of victims who disagreed, feeling that this kind of revenge only adds more trouble and has no real meaning. Andy was so angry she laughed. She could hardly believe those words came from a mother, so she found a way to approach that person, secretly drugged her, and brought her to the secret base. Andy wanted her to open her eyes and see for herself where there really existed. He brought a hammer, wanting the woman to avenge her daughter with her own hands. But not everyone has the courage to fight violence with violence. No matter how Andy threatened or tempted her, the woman remained unmoved. In anger, Andy locked her up. After thinking it over all night, the woman still couldn't accept this approach. She even resented Andy, blaming her for ruining 4 years of her hard work. He threw the woman into a pile of garbage. After returning home, Andy sat holding his shotgun, unable to calm down. As a surgeon, saving lives is his duty, but as a father, avenging his daughter by killing the murderer is his responsibility. These two forces pulled him in opposite directions. Andy finally broke down. Even after smashing up the room into a complete mess, he still couldn't vent the pain inside him. In the end, under the influence of alcohol, he collapsed. The next day, waking up on the floor, he didn't even care about his chipped tooth. He immediately numbed himself with another bottle of alcohol, which made him feel a bit better. But on his way to the bathroom, Andy suddenly froze. His daughter appeared at the other end of the hallway, and when their eyes met, it was as if they had never lost each other. He brought his daughter into the bathroom, then knelt on the floor and carefully untied the hairband from her wrist, revealing the deep marks it had left. She trembled with heartache. Andy still looked at his daughter gently, as if to say, "I'm here for you." She helped wipe the blood from her body, but no matter how hard she tried, the fresh blood on her wrist wouldn't come clean. Andy had just wiped away the blood, but in the blink of an eye, it welled up from the wound again, just like the pain of losing his daughter, which nothing could ever erase. It was the 7th day since she had captured, and it was also her daughter's birthday. According to the plan, Andy was supposed to kill today, but she realized that this might not bring her any relief and would only push her further into the abyss of crime. So she turned the gun on herself, hoping to resolve this impossible dilemma. Unexpectedly, the police showed up at that very moment. Andy let the murderer go, freeing herself. She walked out of hatred's shadows, letting sunlight shine on her again.
Well, the developer said so.
No. No.
After 7 days of revenge, at this moment, Andy neither agrees with revenge nor regrets it. He chooses to stand between the law and humanity, neither breaking the rules nor suppressing his true feelings, allowing both reason and emotion to have their place.